Stu, you're one of the most cited and highly revered people in the world in protein metabolism.
High protein intake, if anything, preserves kidney function. Plant source, animal source, and everybody's favorite these days, collagen, which is
It's literally the worst protein
useless.
you can.
It's filler. It's filler. I don't think intakes beyond 1.6, which is twice the RDA, are going to do much for you.
The animal is much more superior to plant message is not necessarily true.
Welcome back to the Dr. Elaine Norton podcast. And today I am extremely excited because we have on the person who I think is the leading researcher in the world in protein metabolism, Professor Stu Phillips from McMaster University in Canada. Stu is someone whose work I've followed since I was a graduate student. He has done absolutely groundbreaking work on not just protein, but resistance training. Not only is he considered a preeminent expert in the world in protein metabolism, but he is also considered one of the top experts in resistance training, and he is one of the most cited researchers for protein and resistance training in the world. So I think you guys are going to love this interview because Stu and I get into the weeds a little bit, but it always comes back to the practical application. And one of the things I really liked about this interview is Stu, without even being asked, tells you about so many things he changed his mind on, which is the mark of any good scientist. So I think you guys are going to love this interview. And this is my talk with Professor Stu Phillips. Stu, you're one of the most cited and highly revered people in this field. How did you get here? And also, can you talk about your favorite potential postdoc who got away?
Well, first, thanks for the accolades. I'm quick to point out to anybody that says, well, I've done, as you know, given your mentor, Dr. Don Lehman, a good friend of both of ours.
Yep.
Don would deflect the adulation, although he's deserving, to people such as yourself and other folks he's worked with, and say, you know what, I'm a product of, surround yourself with good people, let them do the work, and when they shine, you just look good in their reflected hard work, right? So I'm grateful for the comments, but it's really it's a team game here. I got great students, great postdocs, constantly challenged by all of them to stay up with this stuff. So it's appreciated, but not really all about me. The greatest postdoc that got away was Dr. Lane Norton. I don't think he was doctor at the time, and
No.
I sent him an email and I said, this stuff you're doing in rats is pretty cool. Come and work with me and we'll do it in humans. And I got dusted. I was totally, he was like, I'm going to do this online, maybe bodybuilding thing. And I remember replying to Don and I was like, what the hell? Like, we can make money doing that. So, yeah.
Tell me about it.
You appear to have done okay. So I'll retract my, my trite comment and say, well done, sir. You appear to have forged a good path forward for yourself. So, and you're still one of my online heroes, my friend.
Well, thanks, Stu. It was funny how my naivety at the time, because I don't think you quite came out and said it, but I said, I got this nice email from Stu Phillips, and Lehman goes, yeah, he's asking you to go do a postdoc in his lab. I was like, oh, but so I, just for some color here, Stu, when I went to graduate school, quite frankly, I didn't even really know what a PhD was. I just knew I wanted to work in the fitness industry. I felt like I didn't know anything. And at the time, back in circa 2003, when I started looking at graduate schools, the choices were kind of like, if you wanted to work in the fitness industry, be a PT, open a gym, start a supplement line, try to go be Mr. Olympia. I mean, I'm generalizing, but that was kind of it, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think around the time I was trying to reflect back and think, what social media platforms? And it was pretty much Facebook. I mean, Twitter might have just started, but I mean, there was no Instagram, no TikTok, nothing else going on. So,
Nope. Yeah, Facebook, MySpace, and Twitter.
That's
and
MySpace. I forgot about MySpace. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, I tell people I went to do a PhD just because I was like, well, I don't think I'll be in the unemployment line with a PhD, hopefully. And it'll give me another, 4 to 8 years to figure out what I want to do with my life. And I just kind of got lucky and fell into it. So, so on that note, how did you get into this? How did your interest start in these topics?
Yeah, maybe a little bit like you. I mean, my undergrad and the pictures behind here testify. I did my undergraduate degree in rugby and then with a minor in biochemistry, or maybe the other way around. I'm not sure. So I enjoyed many aspects of my undergraduate education. Some of them were academic. A lot of them were not. I wasn't the best student. And at the end, all I knew at the end, I going into my last year, some folks may have heard the story. I actually broke my leg playing rugby in the summer, and I was supposed to come back and play here in my last year, my final year, my senior year. And I couldn't play, and I was kind of gutted at the time, and I thought, my life was over. But I had time on my hands, so I picked up a senior thesis and I got in the lab and I was like, wow, this is super cool. Like I'm learning so much stuff, and I'm learning not in the way that somebody's telling me how to learn or what it is I should know, but by myself. And that really just, I don't know, pushed a button up here. And then in the last semester of my senior year, I took a nutrition class and I did my undergrad in biochemistry. So
same.
It's for me, it was this sort of revelation. And my supervisor, Dr. Stephanie Atkinson, said, I've got this guy, his name's Mark Tarnopolsky, and he's really into athletes and he does protein metabolism. And I was like, well, hold on. You study athletes and you do, this is just too much. And it was the start of what is now a 35-year beautiful friendship between Mark and myself. And, I huge hat tip to that man. He's probably one of the big reasons, along with Dr. Atkinson, for taking a chance on me, why I'm doing science at all. So it's an interesting journey to look back on. But I knew that I enjoyed learning. I liked learning new things. And each time it came time to make a decision around, master's to the PhD to postdoc, it was always like, I'm just not ready to be done learning. I really enjoy this. But until the day I got this job here, and that was, that was 28 years ago. So it's been a long path, but odd to think that it happened because I broke my leg. But that's probably why it happened. So,
well, and I never had that sort of moment, but I think about some of the small decisions at the time that I didn't put much thought into and where they led me. And I go,
yeah,
oh man, one, made some good decisions without realizing it, but two, got really lucky in some ways,
yeah.
At the time looking for a PhD program, I had no idea where to start. And like you, I did a biochemistry undergrad, which I wanted to touch on. I do feel like doing the biochemistry first, and Layman had the same path. He did biochemistry first.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that is so useful because you understand the mechanisms, but then you get a chance, if you do, nutrition as a graduate, then you can zoom out and you get a much better holistic understanding. And one of the things I really admired about Layman was that he could tell you the mechanisms, but he also understood how these pathways intersected and why, okay, I can tweak a mechanism, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything's going to happen. Do you feel, is that something you look for in students, or do you feel like I have the same, you have the same feeling as me on that, or, what's your opinion on it?
Yeah. I mean, I had the same feeling as you. I had to zoom out from biochemistry to nutrition, and then out a little bit more even to understand, physiology, and then exercise physiology.
Yes.
But I found that getting the grounding in the basic mechanisms, I didn't find that transition that hard, as I've had some students who have been physiology, and then we've pushed them into the mechanisms, and they have, I mean, they've done great by the end, but they found that journey, I think, a little tougher than the zoom out journey. I don't necessarily look for that in people. I like people who do both.
Yeah.
And then the group together, they learn from each other, right? But yeah, it's interesting to look back and think about that. But I do think it gives you a pretty good grounding in how things work. And yeah, it's not a bad path to go through for sure.
Yeah, and I think when you think about like the courses you have to take as biochemistry, if you want to understand biochemistry, you have to understand organic chemistry. If you want to understand organic chemistry, you have to have had basic chemistry. You kind of got to understand physics as well and physical chemistry. And so these things all build. And if you don't understand, kind of how electrons move, then it's going to be a hard time understanding biochemistry.
Man,
so
you're giving me flashbacks to courses of my undergrad that I got through and I did all right, but I was never a great student. So I got where I got just from sheer hard work. I wish I could say I was one of these people where things came super easy, and I have those students now. And I just point out, I'm like, I wasn't like you.
Yeah.
Physical chem, analytical chem, two organic chems, and those were some tough courses, man.
Yeah, it's always funny when people they'll try to like dog on my nutrition degree, and they'll say, well, you went to Illinois. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, here are the courses I took in undergraduate. All right.
Right.
I could have gotten a minor in math if I'd taken 2 more courses. I took Calc 1, 2, 3, differential equations, these are hard courses. And then I'm like, have you bothered to look at where Illinois ranks when it comes to nutrition? Like, why don't you, as they like to say online, do your own research, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
But it's funny. And I did want to touch on, like, when you say things not coming easy to you, a lot of people don't know this, but I almost got put on probation for my PhD program by Lehman.
I've read the story.
Yeah. So I want to touch on this because you mentioned I think this is important for students, the process of doing research and a PhD. People ask me about my coursework for a PhD, and I'm like, well, I don't even really remember the coursework that much. Like the coursework, honestly, was it wasn't easy coursework, but I was so interested in the material, it wasn't hard for me. I got great grades. I think my graduate school graduating GPA was like a 3.83 without waiting. But it was the research. That was the hard part because there's your Lehman was amazing, but he was very much like, you got to be a self-starter. I don't care I'm not going to make you punch a clock. Yeah. If you're in here 2 hours or 20 hours a day, as long as you get done what you need to get done, that's what matters to me. But
that's why Don and I get on so well, because we probably manage people very much the same. I say to all of my students, I'm not a micromanager. I don't check in on you. There's not a work plan every day. You don't come here and get what you're going to do today from me, but you've got to do it all yourself. And like I said, if you're here 2:20 or whatever, meet the deadlines, and we'll be good. That's how it works.
Yeah, and I think the intimidating part about research is, when it comes to courses, and again, I'm not trying to like dog on physicians because I would never want to do what they do, and it's very difficult. But there is a clear path of if you hit these checkpoints, you end up with this outcome. And a PhD is kind of, we got to see what happens. We got to see what happens.
Sure.
My first 2 experiments I did that probably took up about, a year and a half of time in terms of planning and grant writing and stuff. I got no usable data out of it. Nothing. Like it was bad, and it kind of intimidated me, and I got gun shy, and I kind of stopped going into lab for like a period of time. And that's when Lehman had to politely kick me in the ass, thankfully. And, I got it together and actually ended up producing some data I'm proud of. It's
good. It's good data. It's still good data.
Yeah. And what I think what I was most proud of is people like you, and then, Douglas Patton Jones, kind of verified that data in human, which made me feel really good. Obviously like showing things in lab rats is great, but showing it in human beings is a lot more important. So thank you for your work there.
Appreciate it.
So let's get into the meat of potatoes.
Go for it.
Big 10,000 foot question. Because, I got into grad school wanting to get jacked. What is the single most important thing for muscular hypertrophy, for muscle growth?
Going to the weight room. doing it repeatedly, right? And with some sort of plan or consistent effort. I mean, then, it's hard for me to admit this, that the role of protein, which I once thought was a big deal, and it's a deal.
Yeah.
Is smaller than I once thought.
Same. It's funny you say that, because I'll tell people, hey, if we're looking at magnitude, I PhD in nutrition. I think nutrition is important, but going to the gym, I mean, it's like the difference of shooting a 50 caliber versus shooting a BB gun. All right. Like protein makes a difference. It makes a difference. And I think the research literature shows it's a clear difference, but it's in terms of effect size, it's relatively modest. Where, if you want to build muscle, you got to get in the gym. But if we can zoom in a little bit more, the mechanisms of hypertrophy, do we know what, on a kind of a muscle cell or fiber level, what causes that? Because obviously, like, you're taking a mechanical stressor, and somehow that's getting translated into a signal telling the cell, hey, we need more muscle protein.
Right.
Can you give us like a layman's view, pun intended, a layman's view of what that process is?
Yeah. I think after doing this for, over 30 years now, there was a lot of things that I think at the start we thought were important. Nutrition had a paramount role, and certain hormones and everything else like that. The zoom out answer is actually the underpinning mechanism really relies on this translation of mechanical tension, as you say. And somehow, I think we're getting closer. We just published in collaboration with Troy Hornberger a pretty neat paper. We did all the human work because that's what we do, and Troy's lab did all of the rodent work that went along with it to establish the mechanisms of that. Mechanical tension is unique in resistance exercise, unique from aerobic exercise, because there's mechanical tension going on there repeatedly, also, albeit, but that is translated, as you say, within the cell to get a phenotype that makes the muscle get bigger. So, if you take it back to first principles, there must be a stress associated with resistance exercise that the muscle fiber essentially processes and says, that was stressful. We have to adapt to make that less stressful. That's essentially how, any exercise is a stressor, right? And, if it's aerobic exercise, then the stress is energetic. And so you expand mitochondria. If it's resistance exercise, it's obviously tension on the myofibrillar proteins, and probably on the extracellular matrix lattice that is like a scaffold that holds the fiber all together, that says to the fiber, that kind of ripped us up and we need to get better. And the way to get better is to produce more myofibrillar proteins. So it's been interesting to begin to unravel that. I thought, when I first started this, I was like, we're going to have this solved in like 5 years, 10 tops. And I was like, God, like, what will I do then for the rest of my research career? Because we'll find the answer to this, and, gene chips and everything will, sequence the genome. We'll get, and here we are 30 years later, still puzzling over that answer. We think we're getting closer, but a lot of things along the way that we delved into, that we were told by reviewers and a lot of other people, were actually, this is really important. And, hormones was one. The role of protein, manipulating resistance training variables. We've tried to get into those and what I find is the big picture is still the loading, and then the rest is sort of, minor turns of the cube inside. But the big, getting the layers, that's the loading, right? You have to get in the gym, lift, do it consistently, high effort, and then all of the other things are smaller but important when you get sort of up to
I go to the gym regularly. I do it with high effort. I've done it for a number of years, and you're fond of saying, and I've got you on this one. You will amaze yourself through mainly consistency. I don't know if you agree that there's anything more magic than that, but I think it's true.
One of my favorite quotes is, "The magic you're looking for is in the work you're attempting to avoid." I mean,
yeah.
I tell people, I've had some pretty catastrophic injuries. Like I've had end plate fractures in all my discs. I've had all my vertebrae. I've had 2 herniated discs, 2 bulged discs in my lower back, 2 herniated discs in my cervical spine. I've torn muscles in both my hips. I've torn my adductor. I've torn my right pec fully that needed surgery. I've torn my left pec partially, which, by the way, when people hear that, they go, "You're injury prone." And I go, "I've lifted really hard for 26 years. I think I actually have done okay, Which by the way, when people also say this, and I'm actually writing my first book about this, I told you, the research actually shows if you resistance train, you have less pain overall, not more. You can, like obviously if you overtrain, you get injured, that happens. People who resistance train are much more resilient than people who don't. And when you're older, I always say this, when you're old, you're going to have pain one way or the other. My father is very sedentary. Yes. He has sciatica really bad. He's never lifted. He's never done a back squat, right? So when you're old, you're going to have pain. You can be weak and have pain, or you can be strong and have pain, and you can pick which one you want to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so I completely am on the same page with you there. I have this question further down, but we're going to jump to it because you kind of alluded to it.
Okay.
Around 2010, your lab published a paper that was one of the papers that really, I feel, shifted the field. It was called "Muscle Growth is an Intrinsic Process." I still remember the title of it. And I had felt this way for a while. It didn't make sense to me that, and for people listening, the prevailing thought at the time, quite a bit, was that it was the hormonal response to exercise, these putative rises in testosterone and growth hormone and IGF-1 that caused muscle growth. And this is why when people say, well, it just makes sense when they're trying to come up with an answer, I go, I get what you're saying. And if we have no data, I think that's a fine thing to say. But we need to test these things, because I can't tell you how many things have made sense that when we tested it, the answer was the exact opposite. Your lab published a series of papers on this. And what did they actually show? Do systemic hormones matter? Because it didn't make sense to me that if I do, the idea was, well, you do heavy squats because it'll build your entire body because you get a bigger testosterone, IGF-1 release. That just didn't make sense to me from an evolutionary perspective, that a muscle you're not working is going to grow because you're working another muscle.
Right. Yeah. So take a step back, and this comes maybe back to the, grounding in biochemistry for me at least, is that we were doing studies, and most of them were acute protein turnover studies, methods that I'd learned training with Bob Wolf, a good friend of Don Lehman's, and
another legend in protein metabolism.
I mean, I can't tell you what, he changed my life, that guy. It was probably a lot like, Don for you, totally just my mind shifted. And we were being told, you're not measuring the hormones that are driving these processes. And we were like, oh, okay, well, and they said testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1, et cetera. And we said, okay, well, so we'll measure these hormones. And, when you read the literature at that time, we noticed that the peak in these hormones really was about 15 to 30 minutes post-exercise. And by 60 minutes post-exercise, they were down back to baseline. And, everybody sort of looked at it and said, well, they must go up for a reason. And to your point, and I think this is where a lot of people fall down, it's if something happens, there has to be a reason behind it. Like biology is somehow intrinsically intelligent, and it does everything for a reason. And my reason was that exercise is a massive stress. And I always taught my students, I still teach my students this, that when you exercise, it's like every hormone goes up except for insulin. It goes down. And then when you eat, insulin goes up and pretty much everything goes down. And so picking out the stress hormone, which these days seems to be cortisol, we could talk about that, is sort of, and it's a bit of a fallacy. And the hormones weren't up for long enough that they would go and do what we thought they would do, which is translocate across the cell membrane, bind to a nuclear receptor, translocate into the nucleus, affect gene transcription, and then affect the response. And like, it's too short, but maybe,
Exactly.
we weren't as clear on, signaling mechanisms. So we didn't really know. So, that paper that you mentioned, that's Dan West's PhD thesis. He's still a good friend. He lives locally. He's married, got some kids now, they grow up, right? And he did a series of experiments that, to me, I thought at the time, that's it. Like, we've hammered this hormone hypothesis. We can show that you get muscle growth without rises in anabolic hormones. We've shown that they don't augment protein synthesis. We've shown they don't augment hypertrophy. And then we had a big cohort sample that Dan analyzed the hormone responses on, and got a guy that was, essentially gained 100 grams of lean mass, so the hard gainer, and a guy that gained 7.6 kilos in 12 weeks.
Wow.
And I still remember that guy. And he wasn't even a lifter. He was the editor for the school newspaper. And I know. And he did nothing. It was so frustrating, because watching him lift, he was like, literally, you could watch this guy grow. And I said to him, like, what do you do? And he was like, I play a little bit of squash. And I was like, what? And he's like, well, you should see my twin brothers. And I was like, at the time, I should have tweaked to it. We should have got his twin brothers in and taken their muscle as well. But anyway, long story short, the 7.6 guy and the 100 gram guy had hormone responses that were pretty much the same. And then, Hormones 2.0 now, which is what I call it, is trying to make the claim that, long-term changes in hormones in women, estrogen and progesterone, are somehow affecting anabolism and muscle growth. And I'm like, okay, well, if testosterone is driving it, why do women hypertrophy at all? They've got, much lower free and total testosterone. And everybody goes, well, it's estrogen. And I'm like, really? Estrogen is great and anabolic for bone. Progesterone is catabolic for bone. But the translation of those to muscle is, it's just not there. So, that's my hormone rant. But I think we've kind of closed the book on that. But I still, as you do, spend time on Instagram only to be told IGF-1 is a major player. And people cite rodent studies. And in rodents, you can get all kinds of things like outside the physiological range, which nothing translates. Or, guys on steroids, why did they gain muscle? And I'm like, well, here's the normal physiological range, and here's where anabolic steroids are.
Exactly.
Like 3-4 standard deviations all the time. You know? Like, steroids work, I get it, but it doesn't mean that, shifts in testosterone are that big of a deal.
Well, Stu, you touched on several things, and in fact, my next question as well, which we'll get to, but I want to unpack this a little bit more, because so one of the things that I talk about a lot that I think even a lot of scientists do not get and miss the boat on is acute versus chronic exposure. So I'll go two directions with this. The first one is, especially when you're looking at steroid hormones, these are not acute hormones. These are hormones, as you said, they have to translocate to the nucleus, they have to bind to sections of DNA, and then they affect the transcription. And we know pretty clearly that the rate limiting step of protein synthesis is not with transcription, it is with translation initiation. And so when we're looking at least building muscle initially, it is mostly a short-term response. And steroids, as you pointed out, again, the difference is when you're taking anabolic steroids in high doses, you are I don't want to say saturating, that's the wrong term, but you're exposing that muscle tissue, those muscle cells, to chronic levels of high testosterone. That is a very, very different outcome than just an acute, few percentage points rise in testosterone for an hour. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So, and when it comes to, it's different for a hormone like insulin, which pretty much acts very, very quickly. But with testosterone, cortisol, and again, this is on the opposite. And when people freak out about cortisol going up, it's like this is a fuel mobilization response. This is
Absolutely.
not a catabolic or anabolic response. This is a fuel mobilization response. All these hormones going up is just that.
Right.
Now, the other thing that this ties into is people, I make this kind of joke all the time or rant. I go, if you are going to base what we can or shouldn't eat based on short-term responses, then you can't eat anything. Because if you eat protein, you stimulate mTOR. Well, mTOR is tied to cancer. Well, if you eat carbohydrates, insulin and blood glucose go up, and blood glucose is toxic. And if you eat fats, it impedes flow-mediated dilation, and flow-mediated dilation is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Also, you shouldn't exercise at all because it raises cortisol, reactive oxygen species, inflammation, blood pressure, heart rate. If you were an alien and you knew physiology, but you didn't know exercise, and I told you I was going to make you do something that did those things, you'd say, that's horrible, don't do it. So I think so many people completely miss that, and even scientists miss that.
Yeah. And it's possible. I mean, we've made the mistake, I think, historically, particularly in exercise, because, with the advent, you probably remember this transition going from, there was I-125 labeled antibodies. So there was radioactivity associated with measuring hormones for a long period of time. And so only a few people could do this. They only had, a few counters. And then all of a sudden, these ELISA kits came around that were non-radioactive, and everybody could measure hormones. And so everybody did acutely, and then said, therefore, this means something chronically. I'm like, hold on. Like, how do you know that, for starters? What's the signaling mechanism? Do all these signaling mechanisms accumulate over time to create the phenotype that you expect? And so when you test it, the answer is all of these anabolic hormones, there's no relationship between their response acutely and the chronic adaptation that you see.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the mechanical tension. And I tell people talk about muscle damage, metabolic stress. I'm like, well, you can get metabolic stressed going and running, and if you want to be sore, go run a marathon, but you're not going to grow muscle from that,
Yeah.
So it is that mechanical tension. And I just want to jump to kind of a spoiler alert for everyone. So in their studies, and Stu, please correct me if I get this wrong, because it's been a while since I read the paper, but you guys looked at, I believe, 1 rep max strength. You looked at lean mass. I think you looked at cross-sectional area as well in these subjects. And you looked at growth hormone, IGF-1, testosterone, and cortisol. And I just want everybody to know the hormone that was most closely associated with muscle growth was cortisol. It was not growth hormone. It was not IGF-1. It was testosterone. Therefore, cortisol builds muscle. Case closed.
Yeah.
Were you surprised?
I put that up. I feel like I need to refresh people's memories, and everybody goes, but it's hardly a relationship at all. And I'm like, you're right, but you're missing the point. None of the other hormones correlated at all. And the only significant one was cortisol. I'm like, and everybody goes, but it's catabolic. I said, you're reading, you probably got Stryer or Zube or some other biochemistry text or an endocrinology textbook. I'm like, and I point out to students, I'm like, when you learned as an undergrad, we needed to have textbooks because there's too many of you to conduct one-on-one tutorials about how things really work. So we gave you textbooks. They're about 20 years out of date. And, just sorry to say that. And my name's on a few textbooks, so just believe me. So when people, they read about, syndromes where cortisol is chronically elevated and people lose muscle mass. And I'm like, that's right. But that's not the current obsession with cortisol and cortisol coaches and people who are suggesting that we manipulate cortisol. It's a, to your body gesture. It's a head banging moment because it's just diabolical to think like that. But, as you said before, people need to go through these thought cycles, but I'm not planning a series of studies debunking cortisol because when it goes up, So does growth hormone. So does IGF-1. So do, all of these other hormones. And it's a stress response.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that the stress is bad. The stress is actually the sign that you've done something that you need to adapt to.
Well, Stu and I actually had, when I read that paper, I go, well, this makes sense to me because the more stressful workouts.
You were the N of one.
Yeah. The more stressful workouts that cause hypertrophy may cause a greater increase in cortisol. So this is a correlation. This is not a causation sort of thing.
Yeah.
But,
exactly.
Again, these people saying, well, don't do this at this time because it raises cortisol, or don't eat this. Or you are literally wasting your time. This does absolutely nothing. What you are doing does absolutely nothing. And it's like, I always say, it's like they opened up a biochemistry textbook. They looked, okay, cortisol, page 837, read 3 paragraphs and were like, okay, I got it. I'm a cortisol coach.
Yeah.
When you don't understand how it integrates with physiology. And my next question kind of plays off this because you alluded to it as well. Women, there's a lot of, I will say, predatory advertising out there targeted at women, that they are, the most unique snowflakes in the world and they need customized everything, nutrition, training based on their hormones. What does the research actually say about this stuff? You've probably heard me talk about my app, Carbon Diet Coach. That is because it is the best damn macro tracking and nutrition coaching app on the market. I use it, and so should you. I have packed all of my one-on-one nutrition coaching experience and my PhD knowledge into one simple app that will help you build muscle, lose fat, all for just a few dollars a week. It's so simple how it works. All you got to do is track your macros, weigh in regularly, and then check in every week, and our customized nutrition coaching algorithm will give you personalized macronutrient adjustments tailored to your goals and individual metabolism. No fad diets, no BS, just simple science that is guaranteed to work. Millions of pounds of fat have been lost and thousands of lives have been changed with Carbon. So what are you waiting for? Go to joincarbon.com/podcast to take the guesswork out of your diet.
So deep inhalation, pause, and I'll give you, I just want to be careful here because, I'm a man and I don't have the lived experience, never had a menstrual cycle, never gone through menopause. And, that automatically is that I can't offer comment on this because I don't understand it. And the analogy is, well, no oncologist can tell you about cancer unless they've had cancer, right? Or no diabetologist can tell you about diabetes unless they have diabetes. You know what I mean? It's sort
can't
of
tell you not to
ridiculous.
smoke if I don't smoke myself,
Yeah.
I
What
don't
would
know if it's bad.
right? And I understand. So let me just say for flat out starters that I can't tell you about symptoms. I can't relate to what women go through in menopause. But I'll say this as a commentary, and I have a good friend in sociology who talks about the menopause wellness industrial complex, and she studies it from the standpoint of really the understanding that we've known for a long period of time, which is women, girls, and then women are most vulnerable with respect to their mental health, their body image, suggestions for solutions, and to right their lives at 2 points in their life. One is in adolescence and when they're going through puberty, and the algorithms to manipulate, and I hate to say this, young girls and young women are very well established. You unlike a selfie, you do this sort of thing, and you're bombarded with 6 messages from advertisers for beauty products and lots of things and weight loss products, and the manipulation in that space is pretty well established. You come to menopause, and as the partner of a woman who happens to be my boss's boss's boss, I point that out. People say, you're pretty successful, Stu. And I'm like, my boss, is pretty successful, my boss's boss, but my wife is so much higher up the university administration ladder, it's not even funny. So I'll just leave it at that.
We call that punching above your weight class.
way above, who, went through menopause, and I watched from the outside, and it's awful. She had a terrible time. And so I feel the vulnerability. I felt it. I see it. I hear it. And I just think that women are, for lack of a better word, being taken advantage of a little bit by people who promise solutions, say I have the unique answer, attend my weekend course, subscribe to my Substack, here are the supplements that will cure you. There's a lot of truth in a lot of what people say, but I don't think anybody has a unique answer to the question of what to do at that phase in your life.
Yeah.
All of that.
And it's predatory.
To say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. There's a degree of predatory practice in there. There's good people. There's great people. But there are some people who I just think are really taking advantage of women. And I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, hormones 2.0 is estrogen is anabolic for muscle, and hormones are rated according to their androgenicity. Testosterone is top of the heap, and then we sort of go down the list. The top hormone that women have in circulation in high concentrations is progesterone, and it's more anabolic, androgenic than estrogen. And then people say, well, estrogen is anabolic. And I'm like, yeah, not really, not for muscle. And they go, well, look at these rodent studies where I overectomize these rats. And I'm like, that's a radical hysterectomy in a woman. Okay, so first it's not menopause, but it's removal of, and they go, look, they lose muscle. And I'm like, yeah, like complete, lack of the hormone causes muscle, but it's an overnight transition. And that's not what women are going through. Plus, if you give women hormones back in estrogen replacement therapy, there's no effect on muscle. There's lots of effects on cognition, brain fog, hot flashes, so vasomotor symptoms, sleep and everything, which probably for some women get better, not everybody, that could help with some of the sort of symptomology, but it's not the reason why women are going to gain muscle back.
Well, and then the lived experience is difficult, and because you do have people say, well, I did this and I had this experience. And I'll always say, well, there's always a reason for something. There is, or an explanation. It may just not be the explanation that you think is the explanation. And so when it comes to, like, if we look at metabolism, people have this view that like metabolism must be so different between men and women. And then they have the view that, building muscle must be so different, or you need different programs. And I'm just going to jump to the spoilers, guys. The research in here is really underwhelming. Like basically, and Stu, please correct me if I paraphrase this incorrectly, but your metabolism in terms of BMR doesn't really change throughout the course of your life, other than if you lose lean mass, your BMR will go down, your metabolic rate. Metabolic rate is about 90% explained by the amount of lean mass you have. And now, if you start, for example, like if you go through menopause and you're feeling terrible, you're sleeping worse, then you probably, without even realizing it, have become spontaneously less active. You're not moving as much without realizing it. It's not a purposeful thing. And so now you may find yourself putting on some body fat because you're in a positive energy balance. And then if you correct that with, bioidentical hormone replacement or whatever it is, you may feel better. And you start moving more spontaneously. Your workouts are more intense. So yes, there may be an indirect reason why, some of this stuff causes these things, but it doesn't appear to be a direct sort of effect. And then when it comes to women lifting weights, I mean, what's really cool is women gain the same amount of lean mass as men as a percentage of their starting lean mass. And that is, again, even with the differences in physiological levels of testosterone. So when I say that, what I mean is if a woman starts out, she's 50 kilos of lean mass, man starts out 70 kilos of lean mass, and they both gain 10%, the man will have absolutely gained 7 kilos and the woman will have gained 5. So as an absolute number, the man gains more, but as a relative percentage, it's the same. And really the only difference that we've seen between men and women is maybe women recover from resistance training a little bit faster, and maybe they're a little bit less fatigable. But when it comes to, I'm even curious about that, because part of it is, I think, is that the women just use less weight And I think lighter weight men who use less weight, they might see similar effects with. I think that total tonnage does matter, but that's just my own, personal opinion. I don't see a lot of super heavyweight powerlifters squatting 3 times a week like I do lightweight men squatting 3 times a week. They just can't recover from the tonnage. But yeah, please let me know if I got any of that stuff wrong. And do we need to be doing specific resistance training programs for women?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to use your last point and then sort of work back, I mean, I think that there's 2 great meta-analyses out there. One that Mark Ruffalo recently published. I want to say it was Brandon Roberts published the first one. I think Greg Nuckols might be on both of them. But the bottom line is, as you say, that it has a relative percentage of their starting muscle mass, because, boys and girls are all the same, and then puberty hits and then testosterone takes off and boys become young men. And that difference that stays for your whole life. So then men and women are this far apart, but then they lift weights and they all gain relatively, as you said, it's spot on the same amount of lean mass. And so then you think to yourself, well, so clearly testosterone can't be driving that because it's tenfold difference. And somebody goes, oh, it's estrogen taking over. But I'm like, well, men had this sort of close to the same level of estrogen as women in their follicular phase for a period of time. It's actually by default testosterone that makes you male. And so there could be some different mechanisms at play, and I'm not going to dismiss that. But the final phenotype that we're talking about, the muscle mass gain, is almost identical in the way they gain it. And so that really forces you to think, what is so different between men and women? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, but we're all humans that live on Earth. And our metabolisms, despite what a lot of, sort of noise on the internet are actually far more similar than they are different.
Absolutely.
Now, important caveat is people point out to pathophysiology differences, the way women, have cardiovascular disease. It's not the same as men. And I think it's like saying, everybody has cardiovascular disease the same. And it's not true when you look at, African Americans versus Caucasians. It's not the same when you look at Southeast Asians. So we know that there are differences between different races and ethnicities. And there are differences between men and women, but for the fundamental physiology, we're all still humans, and there are differences but they're more subtle than they are this is red and this is green, or this is purple and this is orange. And, and literally, like you said, it's not so different that I would program anything differently from or give a woman any different nutritional advice.
Yep.
Because there's just, I struggle with this, to put it simply, but they're much more similar than they are different.
I agree.
And I, can't say it any simpler than that, but why would you program differently? Now, feelings, how you feel, like that I get, but that's the same for guys, right?
Yes.
If coach says, you know what, today, Elaine, today's the day to smash it, and you go, dude, I was up till 2, I didn't sleep, I'm feeling kind of crappy. The coach says, okay, well, auto regulation says today's not the day we're going to smash it, Lane, right? Even if you had smash day on your schedule. So, coaches make those adjustments all the time. That's coaching 101,
Exactly.
Auto regulation. There's no magic. Sorry.
That is,
yeah.
Stu, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was going to be my next point and next thing I was going to ask you, because I've coached hundreds of women over the course of my life. And some of them will say, oh, during my menstrual cycle, I feel stronger. I feel better.
Yeah.
I have more energy. And some of them say, I feel like crap. I don't want to go train.
Yep.
And so on the whole, you have to understand, people listening, and this is instructive for students and lay people alike. Studies report means, which is the average outcome. Okay. So on average, if Stu and I run across a random woman on the street, we cannot tell her when she should train her more intense sessions.
No.
We can't tell her that, because the research data says it's no different. on the average. But if we talked to her, if we worked with her for a few months, we'd probably be able to say, okay, it looks like on these days, your performance is a little bit lower. Okay, so we're going to back those off a little bit in intensity and volume. It looks like on these days, you tend to do better. So we'll play. But even then, I tell people all the time, hey, I know what should predict my performance pretty well when I go in the gym. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of objective data now because I use a bar velocity device to kind of track things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does not make sense. My best ever 10 rep set of squats was a day after I traveled across the country and I got no sleep the night before, none. Yeah. And I hit 530 for a set of 10. It didn't make any sense. And I tell people like, Oura rings or sleep tracking thing. Right. Even like velocity data, that sort of thing. All this stuff, it can help you inform decisions, but you shouldn't be slave to any of it because at the end of the day, performance is an objective measure. If you are in the gym and you are performing well, regardless of what is going on elsewhere, if you're performing well, you're performing well. And so you can lean into that. Regardless of, hey, you got 8 hours of sleep last night, you ate well, you haven't been traveling, you're not stressed, and your performance is in the crapper, then you got to auto-regulate. And that goes regardless of what's going on hormonally.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's the art and the science of coaching, right? And I mean, there is coaching science and there are some rules, but I think they are more like guidelines. And,
absolutely.
I've coached athletes in a variety of sports, and there are some athletes that have sort of mediocre physiology, but they're so mentally tough that I'm like, well, you're kind of beaten up. They're like, no, bring it on. I can handle this. And other athletes who have great, like absolutely outstanding physiology, but not as mentally strong. And you kind of have to, you're a little bit like handling them with kid gloves. And so not everybody's the same. As you say, here's the mean, and we've taken now, and it's a great move in exercise on other human physiology of plotting data with a box and whisker plot, showing individual data points to emphasize that there is variability. But it's not like the variability with men and women is sort of, like here and here, as you say, relatively speaking, it's about the same net response. Mechanism wise, there may be some different mechanisms going on, but the net result is about the same.
Correct.
But as you say, sometimes the metrics are awesome. Everything works. This is a coachingism, right? All of a sudden everything works. And then all of a sudden nothing works, So you're like, time to change, time to tweak the program. And that's an art as much as it is a science, I would say.
Yeah, touching on that, I think, powerlifting is a very interesting sport because every time I go in the gym, I am very well aware of what my best lift is or what my best performance is. And so it's impossible not to measure against that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And even now, if I'm doing, very rarely do I hit, RPE 10 in the gym. I don't ever get that high. But I can look at certain weights and what I've hit velocity wise, and I know objectively what my best is. Mm-hmm. And I've come to look at training in the following way, especially as you get more advanced. It's a good idea to invest in the stock market because over any 10-year period of time, the stock market has turned a profit, and usually on the average of about 10%. Yeah. But if you zoom into individual days or individual weeks, I could convince you that the stock market was a very bad idea, right? Mm-hmm. Even individual years, I could convince you of that. And so training is the same way. You're going to have times where you're just like, I remember before World Championships last year, my deadlift was just on fire, absolutely clicking. It felt like there wasn't a weight you could put on there that I wasn't going to do. And then after World Championships, it was like, take 100 pounds off. And it was like molasses, and I'm like, why is this happening? It didn't make sense. But over time I've learned, don't get too invested in those individual days, because if something's sluggish, as long as you're consistent, things will come back around. You double down on the things that work. But I think so many people see those fluctuations and they assume that there is some controllable
There's a
thing
reason for that. Yeah. And you know what it is? Like you said, the stock market does this, and maybe some people have a secret insight into what the dips and the valleys are. But I mean, if I think for the most part with human physiology, sometimes you're just sort of like, what direction is the wind blowing?
Yeah.
I'm feeling good. I'm doing this. And so I'm going to go for it, But as you say, long term, if the trend is this, you're doing something right. Or as you get older, if the trend is this, or maybe it's this instead of this, right? So it's all relative. It's different stages in your life. Yeah, I'd like to pretend that the PRs I was doing when I was younger are still within my grasp, but I know they're not.
Yeah. Well, I tell people my plan is I still haven't hit my last PR at age 43. I think I've got a couple more in me. So, but I think the take home from all this is, if you're a female, you don't have to have specific programming.
No.
You should auto-regulate, but everyone should auto-regulate. That's not a unique thing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears from training. Protein. How much protein? So 2 questions.
Yeah.
First one, for those of us like me who want to become the most muscular human beings we possibly can, who care about that last 1%, how much protein should we be eating? And then for the average person who just wants to look good, feel good, how much protein should they be eating? Is there really a difference? I'd be interested in your thoughts. And you feel free to speculate as well, because I know sometimes getting hard answers from data is difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like most interesting questions, the answer all scientists will give you is it depends. To frustrate everybody, right? Because everybody wants an answer. But like, people read papers and it says, this may lead to, they say may, like, what is it? Is it might, or is it like it will or it won't? And I'm like, that's not how science works, right? Like, so let me just say this. Let's start out with the basement level RDA. I don't think that's sufficient for anybody that's out there, particularly people who are older or people who are training really hard. No question about that. So then you get into sort of optimization versus, prevention of deficiency a la RDA end of things. And that's a much more difficult question to answer because, it's the dip the cloth in, squeeze it, and it's like, how much water can we get out of the cloth? And that's really tough to answer. Based on everything we have, I don't think intakes beyond 1.6, which is twice the RDA, are going to do much for you. You might find someone like yourself or a few other people who might squeeze, a little bit more out, and so the line's still going up and the nuances are there. In general, and as sort of a blanket recommendation, I don't think that that's most people. I think that that's the creme de la creme, the top end stuff. Or people who are catabolic, they're sick, they're in the ICU and everything, and we could talk about higher intakes. But honestly, and again, I say just show me some data where you could convince me that that's not the case. And, we've got data to show that we think that that's probably about the upper end. You could go as high as 2.2, so 1 gram per pound, the bodybuilder's holy grail. And you might get a little bit more. But I think for most mere mortals, they're getting just about everything. Like, there's probably more things that they could line up in their training life that are it's not like you're going to unlock something going from 1.6 to 2.2. Let me put it that way. So how's your sleep? How's your relationship with your girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever,
Stress.
What's the stress in your life? Like, are you getting to the gym? Are you able to focus when you're in the gym, or are you just going through the motions? Or this is my favorite one, is like, people sort of, it's like this. And I'm like, what, before we had those, we just sat and rested and pondered life or whatever it was. But people, like a 6-minute rest on a, when a gym, whether there's one squat rack and you're reading your phone, I'm like losing my, anyway. So I digress. Like, dude, you're rested. Like, squat that bar and get out, or stop curling in the squat rack.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
But you know, there's probably more that you could tweak. And, you know, that's an answer that I think frustrates a lot of people because, you know, wow, Phillips, you know, you said, 10 years ago. And I'm like, well, science changes.
Yep.
And all I'm doing is looking at data that we have. We're working with some people that have much better understandings than we do of the mathematics of how to model these outcomes. And they give us different answers. And when you look at that and you accept it on face value, you go, how can I publish that and then stand in front of people and say something different? I mean, that's how science works. So, people looking for the keys to my gains and to unlock this is a protein driven phenomenon. I think the answer is for most people who are hitting 1.6, you squeeze the cloth pretty damn hard and you've gotten pretty much everything you can out of it.
Yeah, so 1.6 grams per kilogram, because some of us in the good old free
0.7 grams per pound. I knew it was coming. 0.7 grams.
Freedom units, America. But so I think we're on the same page here, Stu. And I can point out a few different experiments, or there's some meta regressions as well that they use the term dose dependent response. So. Some of them will say something like up to 3.3 grams per kilo or something like that. Now, here's what I'll tell people. Dose dependent is not the same thing as linear. Okay. And I used the same comparison when I was talking to Brad Schoenfeld about volume. Okay. If you do a few sets, you do a few sets of an exercise per week, you squeeze the cloth pretty good. Okay.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these responses are asymptotic. I love using this term, which basically means you get, if you're going from very, very low protein or very, very low volume to sufficient, it is a linear response. Okay. The more you do, the more you get. All right. Then you start to plateau. And at a certain point, the gains become so marginal and infinitesimal unless you're we won't have the research techniques to actually pick out a difference. You won't be able to pick it out.
Yeah.
That's the important point, right?
Yeah.
Because, if you're looking at, say, lean mass accrual and you're looking at nutrition studies, I mean, what's the longest protein study you're going to get? Maybe 24 weeks, maybe.
Yep. Maybe. Yeah.
Most of them are 8 to 16 weeks. And I'll tell people, you don't add that much muscle mass, even like somebody who doesn't train and goes into train. I mean, for the most part, the 7.8 kilo, that's rare. That's freak. Very rare, right? That is
rare.
That is the outlier. He is outside the confidence interval, right?
Yes, very much so.
So you don't add that much. So you're really looking for small differences between small numbers. And it's really hard to get with these studies. And so what I'll always tell people is I'll say, okay, I'll give you the answer that the scientific research says, and then I'll give the answer if you injected me with truth serum, what I think. And so what I think is if you are interested in being the most muscular person you can be, and that last percentage point matters to you, then you may get, especially over 20 years, for example, of lifting, of eating, there may actually be a noticeable difference at the end of that, but we'll never be able to do a study that will be able to pick that out. We just can't do it. We don't have the means. Researchers would retire in the time of the research study, and good luck good luck finding somebody who would.
I'll be retired long before we figure this out. Don't worry about it. Because it's a question that goes on. But to your point, I mean, I think that there's some general confusion and it relates a little bit to there's this ongoing sort of blown out of proportion argument about volume versus strength and hypertrophy and everything. But, so talking about protein, you're definitely right. Like the low part, it's this, and then the curve begins to, sort of tail off. I think at 1.6, the curve's pretty flat, but it's not, people go, oh, I can still see it's going upwards. And I'm like, okay, but just remember the outcome measure here is DEXA measured lean mass. And they go, yeah, muscle. I'm like, nope, not muscle. A portion of lean mass is muscle. And they're like, how much? I'm like, we don't know. Somewhere between the lowest we've recorded, and we have a new method to look at this, it's about 36%, and the highest is about sort of 62%. So but that's a pretty big range, right? You could say 1 kilo of lean mass is not the same as 1 kilo of muscle mass in 3 or 4 different people. So I'm like, okay, so just think about that. Then they're like, well, what about muscle fiber cross-sectional area? And I'm like, it's ostensibly the gold standard measure, like of biopsy tissue, still really difficult to do. And a ton of variability.
And very invasive.
Go, what about...
Very invasive.
Well,
you want to give up chunks of your leg?
That's what we do. And I'm like, talk to some people in my group that look down the microscope at fibers, and they'll tell you how frustrating it can be at times. And then people go, ultrasound. I'm like, pretty good. Ultrasound cross-sectional area, MRI, and all of these things. And I'm like, we don't have those gold standard measures in everybody, or maybe not even enough people to answer the question that you're talking about. Exactly. Over years and years and years, maybe.
Right.
So then a lot of people go, oh, well, I'll just stick with the 2.2. And I'm like, have at it. Like, I'm no issues with 2.2. Yeah. But don't start sort of saying it starts at 2.2. I'm like, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I tell people I eat around 2.5 grams per kilogram of protein, but part of that is just my own bias coming from growing up in the 90s and 2000s and reading muscle magazines and thinking I need to eat a lot of protein, and I like eating protein, and it's just a habit for me now, Yeah. But I do agree with you, unless you are training very consistently for 10, 20 years, even if you're eating, and again, we may be looking at like very small amounts of difference in lean mass, if at all, if I am right. But you're right. As you approach the top end of that curve where it slows down, I mean, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio when we say dose dependent, right? So you may get 95% of the benefits. I'm just throwing out a number, going from the RDA to 1.6. And then, to get the last 5%, it may take a ridiculous disproportionate amount to get there. And I think we kind of see similar things with volume in some of these meta regressions, right? Like, yes, volume appears to have a dose response. We don't appear to have necessarily found a hard cap on volume. But what's going to happen is at some point, adding more just becomes completely impractical.
Right.
And so I think that's the point I would like to make. Now, on that note, since I eat a high protein amount and people ask, how much do you need, whatnot, then the question becomes, okay, at these high protein amounts, what bad things are happening? So the one that has always persisted, high protein diets are bad for the kidneys. So I know you've done research in this area. I want you to, are high protein diets bad for the kidneys? If people already, and again, I know you're not a nephrologist, but what does the research data say about people who already have kidney disease? Do they need to be eating a low protein diet? Where's the research going on this? Guys, training is infinitely more complicated than nutrition. Where do you start? How many reps? How many sets? How close to failure? If you're confused about where to start with training, but you don't have the money to hire a coach to expertly guide you, check out the BioLane Workout Builder. When you subscribe to the BioLane Workout Builder, you get access to all my evidence-based programming. We have programs for every experience level, goal, and equipment availability. We even have programs for people with essentially no equipment and home gyms or hotel gyms or garage gyms, all the way up to fully equipped commercial gyms. We take all the guesswork out of the reps, sets, and intensity, but give you the flexibility to pick exercises that you prefer and have access to, while still making sure that the exercises that you may sub in are equally effective for building muscle. So if you're ready to take the guesswork out of your training, get strong, and build muscle, click the link in the show notes and sign up to the BioLane Workout Builder today.
Yeah. So, start out, I think just about everybody has read a nutrition textbook, and I went on a campaign for a long period of time to just say, show me, give me a good clinical reference for the statement around higher protein causing declines in renal function. And they would sort of hand wave. Yeah, they'd hand wave around mostly Barry Brenner's early work in the sort of 70s. And he's the guy, the Brenner hypothesis is the whole idea that protein creates urea as a filtrable solute, and then overloading the kidney with, filtrable solutes results in loss of nephrons, the functional unit of the kidney. And most of the Brenner work is done on rodents with, taking out one kidney and doing all kinds of things. And, great work, but the translation to humans then. So it's about a 50-year-old hypothesis now. And I'm still, as I like to point out, I'm waiting for the smoking gun.
Yeah.
Right. I'm waiting for the definitive study. To do causation, it has to be a randomized control trial, high protein, low protein. And the high protein group, their kidney function declines significantly, to the degree that there's damage. And everything we have when you look at the causality, and so the randomized control trials where you do a meta-analysis and everything, shows that actually there's no evidence of that. In fact, if anything, on the high protein intake, your kidney filtration rate goes up, and that's the response we would expect if your kidney's functioning. But everybody talks about then hyperfiltration eventually causing the downward, and I'm like, but you got to show me the downward.
Yeah, when does this
to
happen?
Prove to me that and so everybody goes, well, here's an observational study, and I'm like, okay, well, so we just. We just switched the goalposts, right? And you went from randomized controlled trials to which we know the answer. There is no effective protein intake. There's been several meta-analyses. Ours is one of them. We haven't updated in a long time. But even if we did, I'll bet you, because several other ones have got the same answer, there's no effective protein on the downward slope of kidney function. So then switch to the observational data. Meta-analyses done on this as well, and it's possible to do them. But again, it's not causation. And there's no data. And literally the World Health Organization and the Institute of Medicine have in both of their guidelines that the decline in renal function with age is not, both of them agree. And so it's not just Stu and Lane having a parlay about it, is not related to protein intake. Now, shift to the other end of things. People are in some sort of kidney failure. They've got a decline in kidney function. They may be pre-dialysis. They may be on dialysis. And I think the answer there is that it's a little bit grayer, but if you're on a lower protein diet, you can at least prolong someone's life. And that may be as a function of their kidney function. But there's a sort of rogue group, I'll call them, of nephrologists who think that's a diabolical pursuit. First of all, it's a very restrictive diet on which people lose lean mass. And, that's a result of your body trying to get amino acids into circulation because of your low protein diet. So, they're pushing back and saying, does it even matter for the extra length of life because of the quality of life that you have and the restrictive dietary practices that go along with that?
Lean mass is a predictor of mortality in these disease populations.
Exactly. So it's sort of, you're fighting one and losing on the other. And I think, it would be wrong to characterize a low protein diet in renal failure situations as universally beneficial, particularly when there are other filterable substrates, sodium being one, that you could cut down. And low sodium diets maybe aren't the tastiest either, but they're, I think, a little bit more manageable than a low protein diet.
Yep.
So then a lot of people sort of, then the nephrologists start to, come into the debate. And I'm like, look, I'm not a clinician. So, but the net answer to high protein causes kidney failure is still, there's no data. And everybody goes, but the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence. And I'm like, okay, it's been 50 years since the hypothesis, and we still don't have data. At what point are we willing to step back and say, you know what, the hypothesis was wrong?
Yeah,
or it's net neutral,
Yeah, and unfortunately, stuff becomes dogma. It gets put into a textbook somewhere, and people accept it as true. And I tell people, I'm like, that's one thing very grateful for laymen is we had no problem questioning even the most fundamental beliefs in nutrition, because it's like that if a hypothesis is true, it should be robust. It should be consistent across a lot of different populations and a lot of different scenarios and different labs over the course of time. This is why I tell people, when it comes to, things like, for example, creatine supplementation, I'm very confident that it's beneficial because it has been shown repeatedly in different labs, funding sources, over time, across a broad amount of populations. That is a robust hypothesis. This kidney thing with protein is about as weak as it gets. And it's so funny you say, well, maybe they just need longer. This reminds me of the low carb people whenever they say, well, they didn't get the results because they weren't keto adapted. And so just for anybody who's curious, the definition of keto adapted for low carb zealots is whatever duration the study was plus a little bit longer. Because then they would show that they're keto adapted, and these results that should be there will all of a sudden start to materialize. So, I've even seen, and even though people will lean on some of the cohort data with protein, the cohort data is very mixed on protein and kidney disease. Yep. It is not a clear cut thing. It is very, very mixed. And when you look at, even there was a study that just came out on chronic kidney disease, I think up to stage 3, with people on lower protein versus higher protein. And they actually showed that people on higher protein had quite a bit better survivability. They had better mortality rates.
Yep. They actually had better kidney function. And they've done these, what they call them now, Mendelian randomization studies, where the ostensible or like glossing over all of the genetics is that through understanding genetics, you can ascribe causality to observational data, and even from that standpoint, the only one that I know of, at least, has shown that high protein intake, if anything, preserves kidney function. It doesn't. The low protein intake group are the ones whose kidney function goes down. Now, the ascription of, I'll call it, is that really true? I'm not sure. I don't know enough to say, but I could read the conclusion of that paper. It's in a good journal. It's done by a good group. So I'm placing some faith in, that it was well peer reviewed and everything. So we'll wait for more. But that then to me indicates that, in terms of, is there truth to it? And the answer is we still don't have data that supports the hypothesis. So, it's time to let that one either slide or just back off on people who say that it happens. But it's Brandolini's law, 100%, right? Yeah. The asymmetry principle, the amount of effort once a thesis is out there, taken to disprove it is usually 10 times the magnitude of the work taken to prove it. We can never prove a hypothesis, but anyway, you got my point. But
totally get your point.
There's a lot of circular logic, and people on high protein, people on with kidney failure, low protein diets. I'm like, doesn't mean it caused it. It doesn't. So.
And just a real quick science primer for those out there in research. And the reason Stu is emphasizing randomized controlled trials and Mendelian randomization is because when you do observational research, like cohort data where you're tracking people over time, or cross-sectional data where you're looking at different populations, the issue is confounding variables. Because if you look at cohort data, even the cohort I talked about where people eating higher protein had preserved kidney function better or died later, it can be reverse causation as well. Or it could be, there could be an independent mediator, which is perhaps people who eat higher protein just naturally have better kidney function and crave more protein or something like that. I mean, I don't think that's the case, but it could be. And so
but they could be doing lots of other things that
correct.
we don't know about, right? And that's, with the randomized controlled trial, we fix variables and we can ascribe meaning and truth or causality to it, as opposed to just watching people over time and taking a diet record here, and here. That's observational science, and so
but it is the
50 years and we're not there.
Right. And it is the randomization. I try to hammer this point home. The reason randomization is important is if you let people self-select which group they want to be in, then you are people don't do things in isolation, right?
Yeah.
So this is like the healthy user bias sort of thing, right? Yeah. So somebody who is in a certain group who's eating more protein or less protein, they may have other characteristics with them. Like a lot of these protein studies where they try to tie, remember that just abomination of a paper from like 10 years ago where they were trying to say protein caused lung cancer and all this nonsense. And it's,
thank you for reminding me. Don't let me forget. I got an update on that.
Yeah. I mean, they basically took a sub-analysis of a sub-analysis and tortured the data enough until they found what they wanted to find. And the reality is like, okay, well, people who eat higher protein in Western cultures, a lot of that is coming from processed meat. Okay. Those people are more likely to smoke, I believe. They're more likely to drink more alcohol. There's all these confounding variables. So when you take people and you just randomly assign them to groups, you go, okay, you're going here, you're going here, and we're just doing it randomly. What happens is, even if there are confounding variables, you can assume that those confounding variables are spread evenly across the groups. Right. And so any difference you see from your treatment is hopeful, or any difference you see, you can assume is due to the treatment. And when it comes to Mendelian randomization, this is just genius how this was come up with. Are genetic differences. People who genetically, like I use the Mendelian randomizations on LDL cholesterol a lot. You got people who secrete more or less LDL cholesterol just based on their polymorphisms of their genes. And what's great about these polymorphisms is they are random, and and so you can assume that, okay, they've got this difference, but it doesn't affect other areas of metabolism because they're a random mutation. And so then you can look at basically a lifetime randomized control trial of exposure to something and look and see what it is. And oh, by the way, spoiler alert, everybody, LDL cholesterol matters because you can literally draw a straight line through lifetime LDL cholesterol exposure and the incidence of heart disease. But I digress.
I have no comment, but I agree.
So the one other thing I want to point out is people will say, well, look, I was on a high protein diet. My BUN went up. Some of my markers went up. And Stu, I want to get your take on this. What I tell people is, okay, if you have impaired kidney function or renal disease, these markers will be elevated. But just because these markers are elevated does not mean you have those diseases. These are indicators that might require further study, but they don't mean that you have a disease.
Yes, correct. Yeah. And there's lots of, I hear, I get emails from people quite a bit and they say, oh, I was listening to your podcast and I followed this, high protein. I was on creatine. And then all of a sudden I had these wacky results that my doc was like, hey, you're killing your kidneys with, as you say, elevated blood urea nitrogen, elevated creatinine excretion, and what's going on? And I'm like, so here's 2 or 3 papers showing that those supplements, and given what you're doing and everything, it's actually expected that this would happen. And, so maybe cystatin C is a marker of kidney function, is a better way of looking at things. And you might want to talk to your clinician about that and have them read these papers. And maybe you can get a bit of a break on this, because I wouldn't sound the alarm based on the numbers that you have, but I'm not a clinician. I'm just giving you the information. So I think, my take is, and I remember having this discussion on Instagram, so take it with a grain of salt. I was talking about high protein and somebody chimed in and they said, oh, I have a clinician friend. They have a clinic. Their clinic is full of bodybuilders and, everything else like this. And I was like, wow, that's super interesting. You should tell your clinician friend to write this up, because that would be important information for people to know. And they said, oh, there's been plenty of studies on this. And so again, I'm like, I would love to read these things. Please send me some references or whatever.
And they send you a narrative review, I'm sure.
Well, or it's just radio silence, right? And I'm like, and it is what it is or whatever. But, to say that high protein causes kidney failure, just can't do that.
There's no evidence of it. There's certainly no evidence of it. And if there
Nope.
is any negative effect of protein, I think what we can say is if there is, and I say this very tenuously because I don't believe there is, but if there is, it is very small and very insignificant compared to other risk factors.
Well, you go to most dialysis clinics. Most of the patients there have type 2 diabetes.
Yep.
A lot of them have hypertension as well, which are, if you want to talk about risk factors as lifestyle risk factors. I mean, and you're probably a little bit like me, and I don't want to be overly dramatic when I say this, but the forgiver of many metabolic sins is exercise, right?
Yep.
If you're physically active, a lot of this nutritional risk factor stuff begins to just be a bit of a wash. And, at best, I think it would be a push. In other words, there's not as much nutritional risk, or, hopefully in some you do enough that actually it just tips it. And because physical activity and exercise as a factor, and if you include it in all these analysis, like it just squashes everything in terms of so many risk factors. I mean, it's not a cure-all. And it's not an immunization. That's a bad word these days, obviously. But, it's not going to get you out of everything, but it gets you out of a lot of things. And so some of these things, as I point out to people, if you work your muscles and so give a drive for the protein to go in there and not just sort of, create all these metabolic byproducts that people talk about and urea and everything else like that, then chances are you're actually protected against some of these things. So, and I know people will say, show me the data. And there's lots of data, but maybe not the kidney one. But I believe that from a lot of other standpoints for sure.
Stu, it's funny you bring this up because, like I said, I'm writing my book, and it's the first couple chapters are basically about why muscle is completely underappreciated as a health organ.
Man.
And it's, it was viewed as just, it's vanity. If you're trying to build muscle, it's vanity, right? And it's like, I'm like, if you actually look at the data on this, building muscle and having a healthy level of body fat, it might be the healthiest thing you can do overall across a myriad of different diseases. And I'm a big fan of what's called Occam's razor, which I'm sure, as you know, the literal interpretation is when everything else is equal, the hypothesis that requires the least assumptions is probably true. The lay way to say that is when all things are equal, the simplest answer is typically true. And when it comes to type 2 diabetes, you were alluding to some of this stuff. I tell people, okay, let's look at type 2 diabetes, for example. You have an excess in the bloodstream. This is the issue, right? You have excess lipids, you have excess glucose, and these cause problems. It damages your endothelium. If you have more muscle is basically a metabolic sink. It's very greedy. To turn over muscle, to even build muscle, you turn over so much that never even gets built. Even that futile cycle is good because it is greedy. It is pulling things in. And so this is why if you get type 2 diabetics exercising, not even with no weight loss, if you get them exercising, you will see their blood markers start to resolve very, very quickly. You might not see them resolve all the way, but you'll see them improve very quickly within weeks. Same thing with weight loss. You can take somebody who's type 2 diabetic, and if they start to lose even like 5% of their body weight within a month or two, you will see those blood markers start to resolve because what's happening is you have two big levers here for disposing of nutrients. You have muscle and you have adipose tissue. And type 2 diabetes, essentially what happens is your fat cells have a certain diameter that they can get to before they basically become non-viable anymore because they stress the extracellular matrix. That you were talking about that with muscle earlier. And so now you literally can't stuff any more in. Your body can make more fat cells, which it does tend to do once you get to that point. But once you've gotten to that point where you can't put any more in, it starts spilling into the bloodstream. And your other big mover is muscle because muscle churns through a lot of energy. So if you build muscle, decrease fat, you start to see these things resolve very, very quickly.
It's a big win. Yeah.
And I just think that is so underappreciated, and people want to do all this mechanistics work on type 2 diabetes and these different things. And the reality is you just got to find a place for that stuff in the bloodstream to go. It wants to go. Yeah. You just got to find a place to put it, and muscle and fat are the places to put it.
Yeah. Big, Bob Wolf wrote the, sort of a classic, like the underappreciated role of skeletal muscle.
Back in like 2005, I think, right?
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it was sort of this, well, what do you mean underappreciated? Like you need it to move. And I'm like, does a whole lot more than just, of course you need it to move, right? But it does a whole lot more, as you say, an intermediary metabolism that I don't think we appreciate. I do want to come back to something that you said.
Yeah,
and
hit me.
You and I have gone back and forth, and actually it's your website is the only, I think, quotable source of this. So there was a paper, I want to say it was 2014 in Cell Metabolism. We all went bananas over it. And it was in Cell Metabolism, as I said. It was some great mechanistic data from Walter Longo. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of, growth hormone, protein, IGF-1 and everything. And then there was some NHANES analysis of data that was done that formed the majority of the hoopla, I'll call it, over the protein data. And so myself, in response to that paper. And it was essentially that if you had a high protein intake, your risk for type 2 diabetes went up like a shocking amount. And for cancer, I want to say it was like 7-fold higher or maybe even higher. Like it was just astonishing for high protein intakes until you were 65. And then they actually became protective against mortality. And myself, Don Lehman, Bob Wolf, Nancy Rodriguez, Arnie Astrup, like a bunch of us, we wrote this letter to the editor over the paper because the NHANES analysis was deeply flawed. There's no way that NHANES analysis, had it gone to a nutrition journal, ever would have passed muster. And we were told there's no letters to the editor. But we got it out there anyway. And I know you still have it on your website because when I search for it, it's the only one that comes up. And it's like, I like to call it Don's rant. And I think it's fair.
Trust me,
because
I remember.
He was the lead proponent behind it, but we were like, we all edited it. We all got back in and we put a lot of time and effort and energy, and there was, definitely passion behind that. And it's great that you still have it. So I want to thank you for that. So it's taken a while, because it's 2025, so 11 years later, I just mentioned it to a friend. I said, I don't do this work, but somebody needs to push back and get that data and do the right analysis. So we have. We've done it. And there's no association, like, at all.
Shocking!
None for Nanom. No, I know. It's so anticlimactic to go out and just say, we did the analysis, didn't find the association, but it doesn't matter for animal protein, doesn't matter for plant protein. But it took us, and not a word of a lie, Lane, like it was one of the most gut-wrenching papers I've ever been associated with, because we had to go to I hate to say that there was a little bit of bias against us, to 6 different journals, but we finally got it out. It should be out soon. So I'll be sure to send it to you.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna send it to Don, and I just want to say, Don, it took us a while, but we were right.
Well, and I think Cell is a highly regarded journal, and I think there are good papers that get published in there. But I think one of the issues is, this is a cellular metabolism journal, or supposed to be.
Yeah.
But now you're publishing cohort data in here, which is not your, as you said, if it went to the Journal of Nutrition or American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, there's no way it would have passed the muster, because you would have
passed the bar.
You would have had people on the review board who would have known what to look for. So yes, I completely agree with your rant there. And also thought it was complete nonsense that they wouldn't publish a letter to the editor. That is not an abnormal thing. That is a very normal thing.
It's not how it's done. It's not how it's done in academia. And I think everybody sort of realizes that. I mean, they are what they are, but they are literally the sounding board for other people to express displeasure / concern over these types of issues. And
Yep.
so, we were disappointed with that letter. It got a ton of play in the press. The British tabloids love that kind of stuff. And it was like, eating protein just like smoking.
Yeah, I
Because it
remember that.
increases cancer risk as much as smoking. And I was like,
Unbelievable.
nothing increases cancer risk. Like
No,
nothing.
nothing.
But anyway, so for nutrition to do that, we were, well, shocked is maybe not the right word.
Yeah.
But it's common.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on it. I wanted to ask you about plant versus animal protein for building muscle health.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah. Look, this is something I've changed my mind on. I think that there is probably, definitely from a score standpoint, everybody going to appreciate animal protein, more digestible, more essential amino acids. So the answer in a lot of the trials where, we compare these things is that the animal protein groups would sort of do a little bit better. But we didn't have any other protein other than basically at the time it was soy protein that was out there. Now you've got lots of different plant proteins. We've been able to test them. My good friend, colleague Luc Van Loon's done some work in this area. I think the differences are much smaller than we once thought, and I don't think it matters as much as we once thought. Now, having said that, if you're reliant on plant protein, you have to be a little bit judicious about how you plan your protein intake. But I think the animal is much more superior to plant message is not necessarily true. So and again, people get upset. They're like, well, that's not what you said. And I'm like, well, that's what we're saying today because that's what the science shows. So I don't think it's as big a deal. I think because, as we said, the far bigger driver of, how much muscle you will gain is going to the gym. Now, get up to the top levels and find the people who are plant-based, fat-focused, vegan, whatever it is. The top levels of bodybuilding, they're pretty few and far between, predominantly because I think it just becomes difficult to eat that amount of food and protein that those folks probably need. So I get it at the top levels, so there's a different answer. But for the mere mortals out there looking for a little bit of gain in the gym, and as you said, maybe it's the aesthetics or whatever it is, or just for good health, I don't think that there's much of a big distinction to be made. To be frank.
Yeah, so I have also come around on this. I think, and my PhD research showed this as well, albeit in rats, that at low levels of protein intake, maybe low modest levels of protein intake, then it might matter a lot more. But once you eat enough protein, you get the same response. If you eat enough protein from plant or animal, you will get similar responses. I think if you did a study where you're looking at the RDA of protein of plant versus animal exclusively, you'd probably see a decent difference. I think once
Stay tuned. We'll give you that one pretty soon.
And I think once you get up to like that 1.6 grams per kilo, like you said, I think there's going to be, it's probably going to mostly be washed out, right?
It's a wash. Yeah. I mean, so the sensitivity of the methods, everything begins to converge. And so plant source, animal source, and everybody, everybody's favorite these days, collagen, which is,
it's literally the worst protein you can worst amino acid profile.
It's filler. It's filler.
Yeah.
I mean, it net dilutes everything you give it. You know, if you put it in with whey, you put it in with, soy, you put it in with pea, it just dilutes the score. So it's a true injustice to have that as a dietary protein source.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm an investor in a protein bar called David Protein, and there's some collagen in there, but that's due to mouthfeel, not because we think that that collagen is somehow a better protein or anything like that, But there are companies out there, touting the benefits, the anabolic benefits of collagen and whatnot. It's literally, I mean, you give 30 grams of collagen protein, it does absolutely nothing for muscle protein synthesis.
We use it in every study we've used it. It's always a placebo.
Right.
It's a great placebo control protein.
Yeah. Isonitrogenous, but not going to cause an increase in muscle protein synthesis. So this kind of leads me to my next thing, which is, again, something I kind of changed my mind on as well, which is protein distribution. And I'll segue this into a second question. So I think protein distribution matters a little bit more at lower protein intakes, like I said. And I think that it's more of that, like that last 1%, you know, and I think it's hard to pick these differences out. And we did, in a study I did in rats, we showed a difference in muscle weights with doing basically same total protein, same protein source, but one group getting, you know, it evenly distributed across 3 meals, and the other group basically getting very little at breakfast and lunch and a lot at dinner, 70% at dinner. But what I'll tell people is, okay, that was an 11-week study in rats where I weighed out, I created and weighed out 110 portions 3 times a day for these rats. They were completely eating exactly what I wanted. And then we showed like an 8% difference in muscle weights, right? And 11 weeks of a rat's life, that's years of a human's life.
Yeah.
So I don't, the human studies, some of them have shown a difference of protein distribution, mostly if they have a high protein breakfast versus low. But I think it's hard to pick out. Intermittent fasting is a big trend right now. When it first came out, I said, I think this is a bad idea. It's catabolic. It's not going to be good. And I've kind of come back to the middle where I think if you're doing a more traditional 16-8 intermittent fasting, that you're probably fine, especially if you're like training in your feeding window and you're getting some, 2 or 3 good doses of protein in that time. What are your thoughts? Because mechanistically, from a protein synthesis perspective, the distribution story makes a lot of sense, because you go, okay, you don't have a way to store protein really. You don't really have a way to store it. So if you're not getting these stimulations, how are you going to build muscle? But then the overall research hasn't really shown it to be a huge driver.
Right. So I'm a little like you. I used to talk about even distribution, and I think a lot of us, when we got together, Doug Patton-Jones, Don, Wayne Campbell, like we would talk about protein distribution as an important driver, and the meal-to-meal responses that we were getting would support that as a mechanism, no problem. You begin to do the studies, and then acutely, and Doug did one and showed that it was, you got a better net balance across 24 hours with the tracers, but that's tracer work, right? As you point out. And then you go into higher protein intakes where I don't think that it makes as big a difference. I'm not keen on the, 1 meal a day versus 3 meals a day. I still, in my heart of hearts, think that 3 is better than 1, but I get it. Probably less of a deal than I once thought. And then the recent Tromelin paper from Luke's group with a dose of 25 grams and 100 grams.
It's on here. It was on here for me.
Yeah. Maybe the distribution isn't as important as we once thought. And I think that's the key take-home message of that paper, not that the title as implies, which is there is no upper limit, because there's nothing in that paper that would say that that's true. But anyway, I digress. But to your point, I think it probably matters down at the low ends. I think Don is right. I think that the first meal of the day, and just about every protein synthetic study that's out there is an overnight fasted, first meal of the day study. It's not a subsequent meal of the day study. We've got some data pending a little bit around your, vegan and older people and distribution that really shows that you get, if that first meal is sort of like a typical breakfast meal, you get virtually almost no rise in amino acids at all. And so if you're an older person, that's a big deal, right? Because you're anabolically resistant. And so I think older people, lower protein intakes, the distribution begins to matter more. But younger people, anabolically sensitive, exercising, there's not really as much there. I think it matters more between your waking hours that you're getting in that 1.6 to whatever it is, and you're maximizing your outcomes. So I'm with you. I think it can matter, probably for older people, and probably at intakes closer to the RDA end of things.
Yeah, it's funny because as we talk about this stuff, you're touching on. I'm remembering papers that were really, that were, I think, keystone papers. I'm thinking of the Volpe paper back in 2005, and I still remember the title, Anabolic Signaling Deficits Underlie Muscle Wasting, I think the name of the paper is.
Yeah.
Basically
Right.
showing that what Stu said about elderly people being anabolically resistant. Again, what's very cool is elderly people can still get the same anabolic response to a meal as young people,
Yep.
and they don't have differences in basal levels of protein synthesis. The basal levels are still the same.
No. I think there was some early data that suggested that was the case, but when you look at all those studies, they were bringing older people into the clinical research center and then having them sit around in a bed for a couple of days before they did the trial. And it was probably the enforced, bed rest that was having that impact,
Yep.
to which older people are a little bit more sensitive than younger
Right.
people. So, but yeah, pluck people off the street. We haven't seen, I don't know how many papers, but 20, 25 papers, any difference between basal protein synthesis rates in young and old people.
Yeah, so it's their response, it's their meal responses. And elderly people can still get the same anabolic response. They just require more protein, specifically essential amino acids, to get the response.
Or more activity.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be my driver, and say, they go, do I need to eat more protein? I said, I'd be a bit more active if you could. And they go, I can do that. I'm like, perfect. I think you're fine.
Absolutely. And so, I'm on the same page as you with this stuff. I think if we look at the hierarchy in terms of protein hierarchy, most important thing, total daily intake. Then,
Right.
Protein quality, distribution, these are on lower tiers. And again, with intermittent fasting, I'll tell people, if you look at the research studies, I'm specifically thinking about the research from Grant Tinsley. When they resistance train younger people, 16-8 intermittent fasting versus continuous meal feeding, they don't see differences in 12 weeks at least. They don't see differences.
No.
But if you inject me with True Serum and say, I want you to go train Mr. Olympia, I want you to train future Mr. Olympia, am I going to have them do intermittent fasting? I am absolutely not going to have them do intermittent fasting.
No.
Because maybe it's not worse, but there's definitely not a benefit. People will say, well, intermittent fasting, your growth hormone goes up. We already talked about that. That's not anabolic. I don't know who thinks, you cannot create, if I'm trying to build a house, I can't do it with no materials, this is very basic logic. And then if you do look at some of the more extreme versions of fasting, like alternate day fasting and one meal a day, you do start to see where there are losses of lean mass in those sorts of studies. So I think it matters. I think, like you said, it just matters a little bit less than we thought it did 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, a frustration for people who are on the outside looking in and just saying, well, get your message straight. And I'm like, well, science is an evolutionary process, right? It's not a static, and things change, more data becomes available. And people have changed their minds. But that doesn't mean that you should give up on science. It just means that you have to trust the process a little bit more. The stakes are low, right? We're talking about muscle, and we're not talking about, hopefully some life-threatening disease. But I think the important answer is that it matters probably a lot less than we once thought. I agree.
Yeah, but I will say, building muscle is high stakes, or at least having sufficient amounts of lean mass is high stakes, because, man, when I started doing my research, even I was surprised at how much muscle was protective. Mortality, all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease mortality, cancer mortality, muscle secretes myokines. Think about your body is 30-40% skeletal muscle, and skeletal muscle cancers are almost non-existent in humans. Skeletal muscle is a very inhospitable environment for cancer because it secretes these myokines that are anti-tumorigenic. Then you look at the data on Alzheimer's. There is a very strong association between Alzheimer's and sarcopenia. I think sarcopenia is the progressive loss of muscle mass and age. People who have sarcopenia have up to, I think it's like a 300% increased risk of Alzheimer's. That's like a similar sort of risk factor as smoking and cancer. This is a pretty tight correlation. And then you look at, going to people that go into the ICU, people with more muscle, much more likely to get out earlier,
all kinds of stuff,
get back to full functionality. You can pretty much throw a dart, pick a condition, and there isn't any condition that muscle doesn't help with at least a little bit. And
absolutely.
And then even cognition, as we get older, you have more muscle.
I
The
know.
research shows you have better cognition. You have better
Well,
memory.
that's what I'm banking on. So, but it's not trite to say, right? And I mean, I'm older than you, so we can just get that out there. I mean, I might not look it. No, I'm just joking.
Exactly. Exactly.
The point in the end is I point out so I run like a clinic. It's 2 floors down from here, and it's 500 community members that come in. Average age is 73, and they talk about all of the cardiovascular and metabolic benefits. And I'm like, let's not forget about the brain. And so I have a colleague 5 doors down, and she reminds me constantly that we don't have any drugs to treat dementia. We don't have any drugs to treat. We got a couple. They're pretty crummy, right, for Alzheimer's. So what are you going to do? And, sat around enough people now and listened as I'm on the program to talk about exercise and some sort of like the comic relief. And then somebody else talks about protection and lifestyle risk factors for cognitive decline, which is the number one thing that the folks downstairs fear as they get older in terms of the medical condition. And I say, here's the reduction in risk that you could experience by doing 1, 2, 3, 4, and then probably some more lifestyle choices and physical activity, good diet, good sleep, social connections. And they're like, I got all of those. I'm like, you've just reduced your dementia risk because we've got nothing to treat that stuff. It's just all about mitigating decline. And so I think it's, if there's a frontier to be scratched, that's one of it for sure.
I mean, resistance training, lean mass, reduces reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety, improves bipolar symptoms, improves symptoms of schizophrenia. I mean, what happens, there's a phrase I've been using a lot recently, and I say, what happens in the body affects the mind, and what happens in the mind affects the body. And we used to think that these were two separate things, and now we know that they are very much interconnected. So move your body.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Some quick hits real quick, because I know we're running short on time.
It.
Carnivore diet. Your thoughts on the carnivore diet?
Waste of time.
I think
if you everybody go, it works for me, and I'm like, I've heard that phrase once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Go for it if you like it. It total waste of time. I think it increases your risk for so many things.
Well, and I'll tell people, they'll say, well, I went on the carnivore diet, I got less inflamed. I'm like, oh, you measured your IL-6 and your CRP, did you? Oh, no, you didn't, right? Okay. So what actually happened is you had a sensitivity to a certain source of fiber that you didn't realize. You went on an elimination diet that you didn't realize, and your tummy felt better. You didn't have a tummy ache anymore, and you associated that with inflammation. If you did an elimination diet and then added back in sources of fiber and fruits and vegetables, you can figure out which ones were causing you problems and then just eliminate those. And guess what? You get results, and you wouldn't be
okay.
drastically increasing your risk of colorectal cancer and cardiovascular disease. But anyways, do you need to lift heavy to build muscle? Rep ranges?
No. I mean, the rep range that builds muscle is somewhere between sort of sweet spot 3 and 30 reps. You can do it with lots of things. It's good effort, high effort. So 8 to 9 out of 10. You said you don't need 10 out of 10 on the RPE scale, but 8 to 9 out of 10, I think lots of weight ranges do it.
Yeah, so the research he's referring to is he's done quite a bit of it. In fact, Brad and I talked about this, where I guess he said he left you a comment one time years ago where he was like, this can't be right. If we do it and train people, heavy weights are going to matter. And they did it and train people, and he found it was no difference. If you do
and fair play to Brad, he flat out, he goes, I was wrong, but I needed to do my own study, and I was like, it's cool, it's all good. Thanks for verifying the hypothesis.
I mean, basically, if you do close enough to failure, get close to failure within a couple of reps, and you do the same amount of hard sets, whether you lift heavy or lift light, it appears you build the same amount of muscle. We need to tease apart the details, but that appears to be the very consistent literature.
Very much.
Creatine. Do you recommend it?
Winner.
Yep.
Winner. It's on my supplement shelf, which is a short one. But I take it these days more in the hope that it's going to positively affect your brain. And everybody goes, the data's pretty thin. I'm like, I'm too old. I can't wait for the human trials. I take it because it helps my muscles too, and I think it's a win.
Yeah. I don't know if I would say the data is thin, honestly. I mean, I think it gets a hard rap because
it gets better. It gets better. I think it's coming.
I mean,
we need longer trials. We need the randomized control and everything else like that, and we need it in more populations. But I'm banking on that one for sure.
If the research on creatine's thin, then you've got to say that the research on antidepressants is very, very thin. If you're going based on that,
that may be true too.
Yeah, I mean, so I think when we look at the effect sizes, it ends up being a little bit closer than people think. And again, I'm not saying
fair enough.
I'm not saying people shouldn't use antidepressants or anything like that. I'm not saying that creatine's a replacement. I'm just saying that, like, if you're going to use that criticism, you have to apply it symmetrically.
Fair enough.
Okay. Final question for you, Stu.
Yeah.
And I asked this to all my guests, and I think we've already covered some of this stuff. So maybe if you got a different one. What is one thing that you believed in strongly that you changed your mind on with evidence?
It's got to be the importance of protein. And it kind of guts me to say that. Because
as the world's leading protein researcher.
we put a lot of time and effort into that, and I think it still matters. But, man, I think it matters a whole lot less than I once thought. And, I've sort of tried to put a value on it. I genuinely, in my heart of hearts, the truth serum question, I love that one. I think, training is sort of 85 to 90% of the answer, and then the rest sort of comes in there, and protein's part of it, but there's a lot of other stuff that you throw in there. That gets emotional after a while because, it's tough for me to say that, but I think that's true.
I said, I tell people, I love protein. I went into graduate school looking for more reasons to eat more protein more frequently. Some of the
you and me both.
Right. That's my bias. And I walked out eating less protein less frequently, and the kind of dogma at the time was nutrition is king, and your training is a waste of time if you don't have appropriate nutrition. And I think what I walked away saying is, no, training is king by far.
Yep.
I'm a PhD in nutrition. I studied protein metabolism. Yeah. I wish it was more important. I'm not saying it's unimportant. I think it is important, but the relative contribution compared to resistance training consistently is relatively small.
I agree.
Okay, Stu, where can people find you? Do you take graduate students anymore? Are you interested?
I do. We have a big group. There's 16 in the group right now. People are, feel free to reach out. I'm easy to find on the internet. I'm MacKinProf, MacKinProf, on Instagram, Twitter, and X, and TikTok. Although I'm on TikTok mainly to irritate my youngest son, who says old people shouldn't be on TikTok. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn as well.
Sure. For us old people out there. No, and I will say, like, Stu and Brad Schoenfeld, I respect both of these two so much because you guys do get out there with the average person and talk to people. And you don't need to do that. It's not part of your job description. You have plenty of stuff going on. But I think, we coming from that applied background, I think for us, I don't want to speak for you, you can tell me, but I think for us, it feels weird to just only publish in scientific journals and talk to other scientists without actually going directly to people. And that's one thing Lehman said. He said, the impact you make publishing scientific papers, it matters. He said, but going and talking to people and working with people, that's the stuff that really matters.
I agree 100%. I mean, and the reasons to be on social media are really that I think the lines are drawn pretty clearly now where younger people, I got 3 boys and they get their information from social media. They don't read the newspaper anymore. I know that's going to hurt some people's feelings, but
So you got to get out there. You got to be on social media. You got to have a presence. And I think it's definitely where it's a fulfilling part of my job to get some knowledge translation. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to chat, have some fun, and to get some of the good word out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, Stu, thanks so much for joining me. And like he said, please find him on social media. Do not harass him, okay? Make sure you're nice and respectful. All right, if you want to harass somebody, come harass me because,
Like I keep telling Lane, I'm like, Lane says all the things that I want to say, but I'm either too Canadian and polite to say, or I'm still employed by a university and they would probably fire me if I said it. So, keep up the good fight, brother.
Stu, you would not believe how many academics reach out to me privately and say, thank you, because you say exactly the stuff I wish I could say.
The truth.
I've got a few of them that will send me stuff to debunk, and they're basically like, I hate this person. Go get them. I'm like, all right, I got you.
All right.
All right,
Awesome.
Stu, have a great one, man. Thanks for joining us. This was great.
You too, my friend.